There are moments in life when silence shatters you more than screams ever could, when the person you trusted, the one whose voice once calmed your chaos, now speaks words that burn holes in your soul. And the truth is, sometimes the red flags don't come wrapped in violence or betrayal. They come dressed in soft tones, in subtle phrases, in words that sound harmless but cut you at your core. And if you're not paying attention, you'll keep bleeding emotionally while telling yourself it's just a scratch. There is a certain kind of betrayal that doesn't scream, it whispers. It doesn't strike with force, it drains slowly, drop by drop, until your confidence is gone, your voice trembles, and your nervous system is on fire with confusion. You're too sensitive. Those 3 words may not sound like much to an outsider, but for the man who hears them repeatedly from the woman he loves, they are devastating. They are not just words, they are subtle weapons. Psychological scalpels that slice your emotional core until you question your own reality. Sensitivity is not a weakness. Neuroscience has proven that those who feel deeply are often the most in tune with their surroundings. They pick up emotional signals faster. Their brains are wired to sense tone, micro-expression, tension, changes in body language. They're not dramatic, they're aware. And for many men, especially those raised to be protectors, providers, stoic figures of strength, sensitivity becomes something they bury. But when a man chooses to open up emotionally, when he shares his vulnerabilities, fears, past trauma, or present concerns, it's not because he's weak. It's because he's courageous. It takes more strength to expose your heart than to hide behind a mask of indifference. So when you open up to a woman, when you tell her, that hurt, or I feel dismissed, or I'm not okay with how that made me feel, and her response is to laugh, roll her eyes, or say, you're too sensitive, she is not respecting your humanity. She is not seeing you as a partner. She is reducing your complexity to a flaw. And in that moment, she's not loving you. She's controlling the narrative. Let's look deeper. What does it actually mean when someone tells you you're too sensitive? Often, it's a defense mechanism. It's a way to avoid accountability. Instead of sitting with your pain, instead of looking at the impact of her words or actions, she flips the script. Now you're the problem. Your feelings become the flaw. The conversation moves away from what she said or did and turns into why you are reacting too much. It's emotional gaslighting masked in everyday language. The result, you begin to doubt your emotions. You begin to suppress your responses. You start to walk on eggshells, avoiding topics, silencing your instincts, telling yourself, maybe I am too emotional. Maybe I need to toughen up. And that is the trap. That is how you begin to erase yourself inside a relationship that was never built to honor your soul. Biologically, this suppression is damaging. When you're constantly invalidated, your body keeps score. Cortisol levels rise. Your stress response becomes overactive. You may experience sleep issues, tension headaches, digestive problems, mood swings, all because you are internalizing pain you're not allowed to express. Your nervous system starts treating your relationship as a threat, not a sanctuary. And here's the irony. The very thing you opened up to protect, the relationship, begins to corrode from the inside out because your truth is not welcome in it. Men who stay in these kinds of dynamics often become shells of themselves. They may still go to work, still function, still provide, but internally they are disconnected, emotionally flatlined. It's not because they don't feel anymore. It's because they've learned it's not safe to. And what's most tragic is many of them don't even realize it's happening. They just feel tired or numb or angry all the time without knowing why. But underneath that anger is unvalidated pain. And underneath that pain is a voice that was told again and again, you're too sensitive. Let's be very clear, sensitivity is not a liability in a man. It is one of his greatest assets. A sensitive man is present. He listens, he perceives, he feels. He creates safe spaces for others because he understands what it means to not have one for himself. Sensitivity is not weakness. It is emotional intelligence fueled by deep internal awareness. But in the hands of the wrong person, your sensitivity becomes ammunition. They'll use it to manipulate you, to silence you, to condition you into compliance. And that is why this phrase, you're too sensitive, should never be brushed off. It is not casual. It is a red flag disguised as concern. It is a quiet war on your spirit. And this is the truth you must anchor yourself in. Someone who genuinely loves you will never weaponize your vulnerability. They won't mock the moments you cry. They won't belittle the times you speak from your heart. They won't turn your emotions into shame. A healthy woman, a loving, emotionally secure partner, will lean in when you express discomfort. She will say, tell me more, not, you're overreacting. She will want to understand, not dominate. She will sit with your pain, not silence it. So when you hear those words, "You're too sensitive," you must stop and evaluate, not just the moment, but the pattern. Has this become her way of avoiding responsibility? Is this phrase being used to shut down real conversations? Is she undermining your ability to feel and reflect? And if the answer is yes, then you have to choose your healing over her comfort. Because the longer you stay in that space, the more disconnected you become from yourself. And the moment you lose your emotional clarity, you lose your inner compass. You become someone you don't recognize anymore. Leaving is not about revenge. It's about recovery. It's about reclaiming your right to feel, to process, to grow in an environment that honors you. You don't need to explain your emotions to someone committed to misunderstanding them. You don't need to minimize your heart to be loved. Real love doesn't require you to shrink. It invites you to expand. You must remind yourself your sensitivity is a gift. It's the part of you that notices the world with depth. It's the voice in you that says, "Something's not right," even when everything looks fine on the surface. It's your instinct, your truth, your inner compass. And anyone who tells you that it's too much is simply someone not ready for the depth you offer. So if she says it once, notice it. If she says it twice, question it. If she makes it a pattern, leave. Because the longer you stay, the more you'll internalize the lie that your emotions are a burden. And when a man starts to believe that his own heart is too much, he begins to live half alive. You deserve more. You deserve a relationship that feels like peace, not war. One where your soul doesn't have to armor up every time you speak. One where you can be strong and soft, powerful and vulnerable, all in the same breath. That is real connection. That is emotional safety. That is love. So the next time someone tells you, "You're too sensitive," remember, that's not a reflection of your weakness. It's a mirror of their emotional immaturity. And the man you're becoming has no space for anything that doesn't respect the truth of who you are. Walk away, not because you're broken, but because you finally remembered that you're whole. There are words that enter your ears and exit your memory. Then there are words that stick, words that haunt, words that wrap themselves around your self-worth like a noose tightening with time. You'll never find anyone better than me. It's a phrase that doesn't sound dangerous when heard once, but if repeated, it becomes a prison for the soul. And here's the truth most men don't talk about. This sentence is not just arrogance. It's not just insecurity. It's psychological warfare dressed as confidence. It's not love speaking. It's fear disguised as dominance. When a woman tells you, "You'll never find anyone better than me," what she's doing, whether she realizes it or not, is planting a seed of self-doubt in your mind. And if you're not grounded in your worth, that seed grows. It spreads like ivy through your thoughts, slowly convincing you that she is the best you'll ever have. That her presence in your life is a gift you didn't deserve. That her flaws must be endured because she's a rare treasure you're lucky to hold. And that belief is the beginning of emotional imprisonment. This statement is not romantic. It is not confidence. It is control. Neuroscience shows us that repeated exposure to subtle emotional manipulation activates the brain's fear circuitry, specifically the amygdala. Over time, even when the relationship is clearly damaging, the brain resists separation because it's been conditioned to associate survival with the familiar, even if that familiarity is toxic. So instead of asking, "Is this healthy for me?" you start asking, "What if I never find better?" That fear becomes louder than your pain. You begin to romanticize dysfunction because you've been told it's the best you'll ever get. This is how men lose themselves, not all at once. Slowly, silently, like erosion, piece by piece. At first, you might brush off that sentence. You might hear her say, "You'll never find better than me," and think she's just joking, or being playful, or maybe just feeling insecure. But as it repeats, as it begins to show up after every argument, after every moment you challenge her behavior, it becomes a tactic. A reminder that walking away will leave you empty-handed. And this is where it becomes dangerous, because instead of asking whether she deserves you, you're consumed with the question of whether you could ever do better than her. The root of this manipulation is fear. Not yours, hers. A secure, emotionally mature woman never needs to convince you she's irreplaceable. She doesn't use threats of comparison or weaponized guilt to keep you close. She nurtures the connection through empathy, accountability, and growth. But an insecure woman, especially one who fears being abandoned, will flip the narrative. Instead of addressing her own shortcomings, she'll make you question your standards. She'll suggest that your desire for more is unrealistic, that your dissatisfaction is immaturity, that your longing for peace is weakness. And that's how she keeps you stuck, not because you're trapped physically, but because your vision has been blurred psychologically. Let's call this what it really is: identity theft. Not of your name or your status, but of your worth. Because when someone tells you over and over again that you'll never find better, what they're really doing is redefining your value through their lens. They're convincing you that your market value is so low that what they offer, no matter how damaging, is as good as it gets. And if you believe them, you'll stay not because you're happy, but because you're afraid. This is the emotional version of living in a house that's on fire and being told, no one else will take you in. Think about what that does to a man's psychology, how it makes him cling tighter to the very thing that's hurting him, how it convinces him that fighting for the relationship is noble, when in truth, he's fighting for the illusion of worth someone else assigned to him. Here's what you need to understand at your core: any person who truly values you will never make you feel like they're doing you a favor by loving you. Real love is not charity. It's not obligation. It's not a power trip. It's a mutual recognition of value. And if someone can only feel powerful by making you feel small, then they never loved you. They loved how powerless you felt around them. When a woman says, "You'll never find better than me," she's often trying to make you forget your power. She wants you to overlook her inconsistency, her disrespect, her lack of accountability. She wants you to swallow the mistreatment because she claims to be the best. But if someone truly is the best, they don't need to tell you. They show you through actions, through kindness, through consistency, through how safe you feel around them. And if you don't feel peace in their presence, if you have to constantly earn their affection, if your needs are mocked and your worth is questioned, then I promise you this: they are not the best, not even close. You must remember that fear is a liar. And when you've been in a toxic dynamic long enough, fear starts to sound like reason. You'll say to yourself, "She has her issues, but no one else will understand me." Or, "She pushes my buttons, but we've been through a lot together." Or worse, "I'll never find someone who loves me like she does." But here's the truth: it wasn't love if it required you to abandon yourself. It wasn't love if it made you doubt your own voice. And it wasn't love if it convinced you that you were lucky to endure pain. A man who knows his worth never entertains the idea that there's only one woman in the world capable of seeing it, because real worth isn't negotiable. It's not tied to who stays or who leaves. It's anchored deep in self-awareness, self-respect, and self-trust. And no matter how long you've been with someone, no matter how deep the history runs, you must understand, staying with someone out of fear that you won't find better is the fastest way to forget what you actually deserve. This statement, "You'll never find better than me," is not love. It's a psychological leash. And every time you hear it, you must resist the urge to believe it. Because better isn't just possible, it's inevitable when you leave behind what was never aligned with your peace in the first place. So, what does better look like? Better looks like someone who speaks to you with respect even during conflict. Better looks like someone who honors your emotions, not manipulates them. Better is someone who doesn't measure your worth by what you provide, but by who you are. Better is someone who's not perfect, but is committed to growth. Better is someone who doesn't just say they love you. They show it in 1,000 quiet ways, through patience, through listening, through presence. And yes, you will find better. Not just because she wasn't it, but because you are evolving. You are shedding the need for toxic validation. You are stepping into the version of yourself that no longer seeks permission to be at peace. You are becoming a man who no longer begs to be seen because he has finally opened his own eyes. So when she says, "You'll never find better than me," hear the fear behind it, but don't accept it as truth. Hear the control, but don't submit to it. Smile, not because she's right, but because you know she's wrong. You know your worth. You know what peace feels like now. You know that love should never be something you're afraid to lose, because real love never makes you lose yourself. And when you walk away, walk tall. Not because you're running from pain, but because you're walking toward freedom, toward clarity, toward better. And you don't need to prove it to her. Your peace will say everything. There are words that sound like judgment, but feel like a dagger. They don't just question your actions, they attack your identity. Real men don't act like that. This phrase isn't just condescending, it's destructive. It takes every ounce of growth, vulnerability, evolution, and emotional self-awareness you've worked for, and smashes it against an outdated wall of toxic expectations. It doesn't call you forward, it pushes you backward into a version of yourself that you've outgrown. And in that moment, the damage is not just emotional, it's neurological, psychological, and deeply spiritual. When a woman says, "Real men don't act like that," what she's really doing is trying to mold you into a version of masculinity that serves her emotional comfort. Not your well-being, not your wholeness, just her image of control. And here's the brutal truth, it's manipulation disguised as a standard. It's a weapon used to shame you for feeling, for thinking differently, for expressing hurt, for saying no, for not being what she needs you to be in that exact moment. Let's break this down. You are a man. You were born into a world that taught you very early what being a man is supposed to look like. Don't cry. Don't talk too much. Don't complain. Be strong. Be silent. Provide. Protect. Suppress. That narrative gets wired into your nervous system. Your brain forms pathways around it. Your body responds to it. And for years, maybe decades, you move through the world believing that your worth is tied to performance, not presence, not vulnerability, not depth, but what you do, what you fix, what you hold in, what you never say out loud. And then, at some point, you start to evolve. You start to peel back the layers. You begin to feel things you never gave yourself permission to feel before. You start opening up, speaking honestly, setting boundaries, saying no. Maybe you start going to therapy, or journaling, or talking to friends about the stuff that eats away at you at 2 a.m., you begin stepping into the fullness of who you are beyond the old script. And then suddenly, someone you love, someone who claims to support you, says those 6 words that punch you in the soul. Real men don't act like that. Do you see what that does? It attacks your evolution. It shames your healing. It implies that the pain you've been carrying isn't valid. It tells you in no uncertain terms that to be loved, you must revert back to who you were before you became aware of yourself. This kind of language is psychological warfare wrapped in gender expectations. It's not only emotionally immature, it's dangerous. Because the moment you begin to believe that showing emotion, being expressive, being tender, being human somehow makes you less of a man, you begin to betray your own becoming. You shrink, you fold, you silence yourself, you repress, you harden, not because you want to, but because you feel you have to in order to be seen, to be accepted, to be loved. And that suppression doesn't go away. It shows up in your body in the form of tension, migraines, insomnia, anxiety, digestive issues, mood swings. Why? Because when you suppress emotion, your nervous system goes into overdrive. Your brain doesn't register safety. And over time, what was once just emotional discomfort turns into chronic physiological distress. So what's really being said when a woman tells you real men don't act like that? She's not speaking from a place of love. She's speaking from fear, from conditioning, from insecurity. Maybe your evolution threatens her control. Maybe your vulnerability reminds her of something she hasn't faced in herself. Maybe your willingness to set boundaries makes her feel powerless. Whatever it is, it's not your responsibility to carry. You must understand this: real men do act like that. Real men cry. Real men express their needs. Real men say, "That hurt me." Real men walk away from disrespect. Real men go to therapy. Real men forgive. Real men rest. Real men change their minds. Real men grow. Real men feel deeply. Real men love hard. Real men say no. Real men soften. Real men have bad days. Real men heal. You don't owe anyone a performance of masculinity. You don't need to be stoic to be strong. You don't need to be quiet to be powerful. You don't need to be emotionless to be respected. The strength of a man is not in how much pain he can endure without complaint. The strength of a man is in his ability to not become numb, to not become cold, to not shut down. It's in his ability to feel everything and still move forward with grace, dignity, and fire. When someone tries to define your manhood based on how convenient or non-threatening you are to them, that's not a relationship. That's control. That's manipulation. That's someone projecting their fears onto you and demanding that you live by them. Let me ask you this: how many men have suffered in silence because they were afraid to be called less of a man? How many fathers, brothers, husbands, friends have walked through life battling demons alone because someone once said to them, "Real men don't act like that"? And how many of those men broke? Not because they were weak, but because they were never given permission to be whole. You don't need permission. Not anymore. You have earned the right to be full, to be seen, to be all of yourself. And anyone who makes you feel like you need to be less in order to be loved must not be given access to your heart. Because real love doesn't demand your silence. It holds space for your voice, Real love doesn't shrink you into stereotypes. It expands you into authenticity. If a woman you love tries to shame you with those words, real men don't act like that. You need to pause, breathe, reflect, and then ask yourself, what is she really saying? What fear is she trying to project onto me? And most importantly, what part of myself am I betraying by staying silent in the face of that? You are not here to conform to someone's outdated idea of masculinity. You are here to embody a version of manhood that is honest, present, compassionate, and powerful. You are here to lead, not through dominance, but through depth, through integrity, through self-awareness. So the next time someone says, real men don't act like that, look them in the eyes and say, real men feel, real men heal, real men choose truth over performance. And if that's too much for you, then maybe you're not ready for a real man. And then rise into your full power. Because the world doesn't need more men who are silent, stoic shells. It needs men who are grounded, men who are clear, men who are brave enough to stand tall in the fire of their own transformation. You are not too much. You are not too emotional. You are not too soft. You are becoming. There are few things more corrosive to the human spirit than being held responsible for someone else's chaos. Everything is your fault. When these words are spoken, especially by someone you love, they don't just hit your ears, they strike your identity. They lodge themselves in your nervous system. And over time, they change the way you see yourself. You stop being a partner and start being a scapegoat. You're not in a relationship, you're in a courtroom and you're always on trial. This phrase is not just about blame, it's about power. It's about control. It's about rewriting the story of every disagreement, every hardship, every emotional storm, so that the blame falls squarely on you again and again until you start to believe the lie. Until you carry guilt for things you didn't do, apologize for wounds you didn't cause, and feel responsible for someone else's emotional instability. Let's call it what it is, emotional manipulation. And when it becomes a pattern, it creates a trauma bond. Your nervous system starts to associate love with guilt, with walking on eggshells, with anticipating explosions. You lose your ability to tell the difference between actual accountability and manufactured blame. And that distortion, over time, erodes your self-trust. Here's what's happening in your brain. When you're constantly blamed, your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reasoning and decision-making, becomes clouded by emotional noise. Your amygdala is hijacked by stress, constantly firing signals that tell you you're in danger, you're wrong, you need to fix this. And instead of calmly evaluating the situation, you go into emotional overdrive. You try to soothe, you try to fix, you try to prevent the next outburst. You become more focused on peacekeeping than truth. That's not love, that's survival. And if you grew up in an environment where love and blame were intertwined, this dynamic feels familiar, even comforting. You were conditioned to absorb emotions that were never yours to carry. And now, in your adult relationships, you find yourself doing the same. You take the blame not because it's true, but because it feels safer than confrontation. You'd rather lose a little bit of yourself than risk losing the relationship. But let me tell you, that kind of love is not love, it's emotional captivity. When a woman tells you everything is your fault, again and again, she is stripping you of your individuality. She is rewriting the narrative so that her flaws go unchecked, her actions unexamined, and her emotional outbursts never questioned. It's not about truth. It's about power imbalance. She becomes the victim in every story, and you become the villain. And over time, this changes you. You start apologizing even when you haven't done anything wrong. You start doubting your memory of events. You stop defending yourself, not because you agree, but because you're exhausted. You lose the energy to fight for your truth. You just want peace, even if that peace costs you your self-worth. This isn't just emotional abuse. It's identity erosion. You lose the thread of who you are. You don't trust your instincts. You second-guess your reactions. You question your gut. And this internal confusion is exactly what emotional manipulators want, because a confused man is a compliant man. But let's be clear. You are not at fault for someone else's unwillingness to grow. You are not to blame for another person's temper, insecurities, unhealed trauma, or refusal to take responsibility. You are not a punching bag for displaced emotions. You are not her therapist, her father, or her savior. You are a man with his own needs, wounds, values, and truth. And the moment you start carrying someone else's blame as your own is the moment you start bleeding emotionally from wounds that were never yours to begin with. Let's get brutally honest. What kind of woman needs to make everything your fault in order to feel right? Not a healed woman, not a woman ready for partnership, That's a woman in survival mode. A woman who uses shame as a shield. A woman who hasn't learned to sit with her own discomfort, so she throws it at you and demands you clean up the mess. And here's the sickest part: when you finally break, when you lose your temper, when you get defensive, when you finally snap under the pressure of being blamed for everything, then she'll say, "See, look what you've done." And the cycle repeats. This is not conflict. This is entrapment. In a healthy relationship, disagreements lead to dialogue, not guilt. In a healthy relationship, both people own their stuff. They say, "That's on me." They listen. They reflect. They grow. They hold space for discomfort without weaponizing it. They repair, not destroy. They don't use love as leverage to make you feel small. So what do you do when someone constantly blames you? First, you stop internalizing their dysfunction. Just because someone says it's your fault doesn't make it true. Learn to separate their story from your reality. Pay attention to patterns. Does she ever take accountability? Does she listen when you express your feelings, or does she immediately turn it back on you? Does she ever say, "I was wrong"? If not, then you're not in a relationship. You're in a blame economy, and she's cashing in on your silence. Second, you must reclaim your voice. That doesn't mean yelling. It means clarity. It means saying, "That's not true," and walking away from the conversation if it becomes abusive. It means recognizing that your peace is more valuable than her approval. It means refusing to be guilt-tripped into submission. Third, you must ask yourself why you've stayed. That's not a question of shame, it's a question of self-awareness. What wound in you has made this dynamic feel normal? What part of you believes you deserve to be blamed for everything? That's the part that needs healing, because once you heal it, her words lose their power. And finally, you must be willing to leave if nothing changes. That's the hardest truth. But you cannot build a future with someone who refuses to own their past. You cannot build safety with someone who needs you to be the villain in order to feel like the victim. You cannot stay in a space where your growth is punished and your pain is ignored. You deserve more than blame. You deserve accountability, reciprocity, clarity, peace. You deserve a woman who can sit with her own emotions and not throw them at you like grenades. You deserve a relationship where your truth is not up for debate, where love doesn't come with strings, where you're allowed to be human, not just a shield for someone else's storms. So when you hear those words, "Everything is your fault," don't just hear the words. Hear the pattern. Hear the pain behind them. Hear the truth that's being silenced, and then choose yourself, because love should not feel like a court sentence. Few phrases are more gut-wrenching than hearing this from the woman you love. "I didn't ask you to do anything for me," not because of the words themselves, but because of what they truly mean beneath the surface. This sentence, when spoken with coldness, doesn't just deny gratitude, it denies the bond that holds a relationship together. It's the moment you realize that everything you poured into the connection, your time, your effort, your energy, your sacrifices, wasn't seen, wasn't valued, and worse, was discarded like it never mattered. This phrase is a brutal rejection of your intention. And for a man, intention is sacred, especially when he's in love. Men don't always speak in long, expressive paragraphs. We don't always cry in public or ask for acknowledgement. But when we love, we act, we build, we solve, we anticipate needs. We stretch ourselves without being asked. We fix problems she doesn't even know exist yet. And when a man gives like that, not out of obligation, but out of love, it's not just about being useful. It's about saying, "I see you. I choose you. I want to make your life easier, better, safer." So when that effort is reduced to, "I didn't ask you to," what she's really saying is, "Your love was unnecessary." Do you realize how that lands? It makes you question everything. Not just the relationship. It makes you doubt your instinct to give. It makes you pull back from your natural role as a provider. Not in terms of money, but in terms of emotional security and presence. You start to wonder, was I wrong for caring this much? Was I naive for showing up when she needed me? Was I weak for loving her the way I did? And those questions are seeds that grow into walls, cold, hard walls around your heart. Let's go deeper. When a woman says, I didn't ask you to do anything for me, it usually comes in a moment of tension, when you bring up how much you've sacrificed, or when you express hurt after realizing the relationship feels one-sided. You're not demanding praise. You're not keeping score. You're opening your heart and saying, "I've given everything I had, and I don't feel seen." But instead of receiving your vulnerability with empathy, she fires back with dismissal. She uses those words to erase all your efforts in one breath. "I didn't ask you to." This is not just emotional dismissal. It's gaslighting. She's shifting the blame from her lack of appreciation to your act of love, as if you are now guilty for doing too much. She's not saying, "I didn't need you to overextend." She's saying, "You shouldn't expect me to care that you did." And that is where it becomes dangerous. Because now, giving becomes shameful, caring becomes foolish, and you begin to internalize the idea that love is something you should hide rather than offer. This changes men, not temporarily, sometimes for life. The next woman who enters your life might meet a colder version of you, not because she deserves it, but because you're afraid. You're afraid of doing too much and being told it meant nothing. You're afraid of showing up and being told you were never needed. So you withhold. You build walls. You love with conditions, not because you're manipulative, but because you were made to feel like your heart was a burden. This is how emotional numbness starts. It doesn't come from weakness. It comes from burnout, soul burnout, from constantly giving in places where there is no emotional return, from investing in a connection that never once said, "Thank you. I see what you did. I know you didn't have to. I appreciate you." Appreciation isn't just nice, it's essential. The human brain is wired for reward, for recognition, and when it gets none, over and over, it starts to shut down emotionally. It stops seeing value in giving. It stops trusting the point of love. And here's the darkest part of that phrase. "I didn't ask you to do anything for me." It tells you that love only counts when it's demanded, not offered. That unless she specifically requested your help, your support, your time, your protection, it was meaningless. That's not love. That's a transactional mindset. That's someone who doesn't understand, or worse, doesn't want to acknowledge what real intimacy looks like. In a healthy relationship, love is given freely, but it is never taken for granted. A healthy woman sees your efforts. She feels your presence. She doesn't need a checklist to value what you've done. She thanks you because she wants to, not because you asked. She understands that your contributions are part of the emotional ecosystem of the relationship. She doesn't dismiss your love, she nurtures it. But if you're with someone who weaponizes your giving by saying, "Well, I never asked you," that's a clear sign of emotional immaturity. Or worse, emotional manipulation. Because what she's really saying is, "I reserve the right to enjoy the benefits of your effort while denying any responsibility to appreciate it." That is theft, emotional theft. She took your love, your labor, your loyalty, and when you asked for emotional accountability, she gave you cold logic instead. You chose to do it. Not my problem. That is a person who is incapable of building partnership. That is someone stuck in the mindset of entitlement, not connection. So what do you do with this? First, you must stop apologizing for how much you care. Your ability to give is not your weakness. It is your superpower. Your heart is not too big. The world is just full of people too small to hold it. Second, you must recognize that appreciation is a requirement, not a luxury. If your presence, your effort, your loyalty is not met with consistent gratitude, you are in a one-sided relationship. And no matter how strong you are, you cannot carry an entire relationship on your shoulders forever. Third, you must stop begging to be seen. Stop trying to prove your worth to someone who refuses to recognize it. You are not here to convince her that you matter. You're here to love, to build, to rise, with someone who already knows your value. And finally, you must have the courage to leave when you are emotionally unappreciated, not to punish her, but to protect your soul. Because the longer you stay in a place where your love is treated like an inconvenience, the more you lose yourself. The more you begin to believe that your feelings are too much. The more you convince yourself that next time you should just stay quiet, do less, give less. No, the answer is not to give less. The answer is to give to someone who gets it, someone who receives your love with reverence, someone who knows how rare your effort is, someone who doesn't just say thank you, but lives in a way that makes you feel thanked every day. So if she ever looks you in the eyes and says, "I didn't ask you to do anything for me," you need to look back and say, "I know. That's what made it love." And then walk away from anyone who can't understand what a gift that was. You were never asking for applause. You were asking for partnership. And if that's too much for her, then she was never enough for you. Let her go. Not in anger, but in wisdom, in peace, in power. Because the right woman will never dismiss what you gave freely. She will cherish it, she will honor it, and she will give it back tenfold.